Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Joseph Palacini. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. Thanks again for tuning into my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe so I can continue to put out educational content about Canadian immigration from a consultant's perspective and showing people how to navigate different streams and different applications. Of course, this doesn't really constitute legal advice. I mean, I'm showing you where you can find certain things. I'm showing you how you can do certain applications depending on certain circumstances. But of course, everybody's circumstances are different. And I do recommend that if you don't know what you're doing, to use full representation. If you like to be self-represented, it's always worth paying for a consultation or getting a review with an RCIC, in my opinion, just to make sure that you have that second set of eyes, make sure everything's looking okay and fine on your application. I think that's very important. I also believe that's where the immigration industry is going. So that's what I aim to do with this channel, is really support people and show them things that I come across every single day, and educate people on immigration, educate people on the processes. So today I'm going to be talking about the OINP International Student Stream. It's going to be a deep dive, skip through what you don't need, skip to the parts that you do need. I'm going to talk a little bit about how our economic immigration system has been changing and how it'll continue to change into the future. Things to consider when you're looking for a path to PR. And then I'm going to dive right into the eligibility requirements under the International Student Stream, where to find them, the eligibility requirements for the employer. I'm going to show you how to submit an EOI. I'm going to go into my representative's account on the OINP on key account and actually go through that and show you how the points are calculated. And through this video, I hope to show you things that you might not have known before or you didn't really consider. So what I've seen after doing tons of consultations and meeting with a lot of people is that, and we all know this, express entry is long gone, or the golden era of express entry. You know, back in the day, four factors really mattered deeply. And it was age, education, English, experience. You know, you got a couple years work experience, you spoke good English, you had good education, you were young, you were pretty much guaranteed to get an invitation under Canadian experience class. We know that's not the case. And why is that not the case? Well, they grossly overestimated the amount of temporary residents that Canada could support. They didn't reel in the shady institutions that were printing study permits and printing PGWPs. They didn't reel in the shady employers with the LMIA program and temporary foreign workers. But now they're starting to kind of crack down on that because they want to bring TR levels back down to a more sustainable level, which I think is a great move. And so hopefully there will be less competition in the PR space. But people don't look at PNPs as much as they should. I think they're scared of them. They feel like, oh, it's so much more complicated. It's not 6 months. In my experience, they're pretty quick compared to express entry. You know, express entry is the gold standard generally in processing. You're looking at under 6 or 7 months processing a PR application from submitting. But with PNPs, I've seen Alberta Rural Renewal approved in 6 to 7 months. You know, it's not an express entry application. It's submitted through the PR portal. It was back in the day what we called a paper-based application. So they are pretty quick, and PNP express entries are also just as quick. What I've noticed is, and when you read through the policies and the guidelines and how they approach this, is the provinces are the ones doing the eligibility in the PNPs. So IRCC really is then left with just, you know, criminality, admissibility, medical concerns, and they're not really doing so much due diligence on the eligibility for it. I mean, if they have concerns about eligibility, they can get the opinion, but they have to get the opinion of a second officer to do so. They would have to notify the provincial nominee and the provincial officer, I should say. So the PNPs actually, it's almost like you're applying for permanent residence with the province when you're applying for a nomination. For the most part, you're submitting a lot of supporting documentation. Okay. And if you're living and working in that province and you have the intention to settle there, what's wrong with pursuing a PNP, right? For some people, there just isn't a pathway in express entry right now. And if we were to look at, I mean, I'm just going to dive right into, before even talking about the entire procedure, whether you are eligible or not, we can look at the scoring factors, compare the scoring factors to this international student OINP compared to the scoring factors of a CRS, right? So when you look at the comprehensive ranking system, age is very important. You know, if the average score right now in express entry is like 400 or 450, you know, age is 20%, level of education's more than 25%. Official language proficiency is huge in terms of points. Spouse factors are nil. In OINP, spouse factors are actually nil. They're actually nothing, right? Whereas in comprehensive ranking, you can get points for your spouse. Skills transferability factors, this is, yeah, they heavily weight foreign work experience and language skills, but everybody can pretty much get those. And the big distinguishing factors, yeah, there's adaptability, the scoring is heavily based on age and English, and right now a lot with French, okay? And absolutely nothing to do with some of the factors in OINP that are things like earnings. OINP earnings, is very important, right? So let's look at the factors in OINP international student. They base it on the skill level of your job. That's the tier, okay? So you can get 10 points for a managerial position or a professional occupation, and you get 0 points for a unskilled labor occupation. But let's look at 2 and 3. You get 8 points, right? As opposed to 10. They go as granular as the occupational category, which arguably now with category-specific express entry, there's some discrimination there. But here, what are they targeting? They're targeting managers, they're targeting engineers, and they're targeting healthcare. That's the first digit of your NOC code, the occupational category group, right? And if you go to noc.esdc, we can look at the structure of it and from a hierarchical level. And yeah, natural and applied sciences and related occupations. So when I said they like engineers, they like health occupations, and they like legislative and senior management occupations. Well, you know, in express entry, there's a lot of science occupations that don't qualify for STEM. STEM is pretty much just developers and programmers and IT, right? It doesn't include something like a chemical engineer. It doesn't include maybe other occupations here, chemical technologists and technicians. So that's where you've got to start thinking, okay, if I've got these positive factors in OINP and then I'm not recognized for those factors in EE, maybe I got to start rethinking my strategy, right? Maybe I'm not looking after arranged employment right now. Maybe I've got 9 months left on my PGWP and I should start looking how to get drawn an international student and go through a PNP program, right? Let's look at the other factors. And what don't they care about? They don't care about sales and service and arts. That's what they don't care about. Or art, culture, recreation, and sport, and sales and service. So food service supervisor, technical sales representative even. They're very low ranked here on OINP, okay? I believe even corporate sales manager would be here, 6-0. They don't want white collar in OINP clearly for this type of managerial in sales and service, right? Looking at wage. Well, this is lovely because they don't discriminate in CRS on how much you're paid. I love this. I believe that what somebody is paid can be a very good determining factor as to how much value they're contributing to the economy. It certainly is a good factor into how much tax they're paying because we have progressive taxation in Canada, right? So if somebody is getting paid 50, 60 bucks an hour, yeah, you want to encourage high paying newcomers that are working in a field that they're good at, that they're providing a lot of value. They're clearly providing a lot of value if they're getting paid that much, genuinely, legitimately. So they should be rewarded for it. So I like how they have that kind of granularity here. Work or study permit status. This is great too. You can see you get an extra 10 points if you're on a valid work or study permit. So because you can apply once you've basically finished your credential, and you still might be on a study permit at that time. So you get 10 points for being on that valid work or study permit status. And a valid work permit would also be a work permit that's, was from a PGWP issued in Alberta. So maybe if you did study in Alberta, but now you're in Ontario and it's one of the eligible Canadian institutions, you did a bachelor's degree in Alberta, you could utilize this program. They also favor job tenure with employer. I think that's great. What I say time and time again, we need to be ranking immigrants based upon their history in Canada. I wish there was more granularity and more breakdown for it. Like, I think somebody who's been working, 12 months or more, it should go up, but we're going to learn later the eligibility is you have to have graduated less than 2 years ago to take advantage of this program anyways. But I do believe that, yeah, job tenure matters. It shows it's your past history with Canada. It's what you've done. Same thing with earnings history. If you're making more than $40K a year in any of the last 5 years while you've been in Canada, you get 3 points. Education. This is great. They have this because they're saying, look, we want educated people to go through this stream. Perfect. Maybe they have a bachelor degree from overseas, but they got a post-grad certificate here in Ontario. Well, they can count their bachelor and get 6 points from overseas. They just need to get a WES, World Education Services, or an ECA, an Education Credential Assessment, to prove that that overseas education is equivalent to a bachelor degree, okay? And then they have their eligible education credential for the Canadian education credential or the Ontario education credential, and this is what they favor. They favor STEM, health, maths, computer science, trades. Okay, business and administration, you can get 6 points for that. What I find a little bit confusing: arts and humanities, then they have business, but then they have business and administration, and then they also have business here. So yeah, I find that a little bit confusing. But obviously if it's business and administration, then you can get 6 points for it. But I feel like there's a bit of an overlap, or there's a lot of room for misinterpretation there. Canadian education experience. This is also, do you have just one Canadian credential, or do you have a dual diploma degree, right? Like Lakehead's engineering program. You could get then 10 points because you have 2 Canadian education credentials, especially because they're in Ontario. Language. You see, language is important, but it's not as heavily weighted because the scores are around 70 or 80 in the recent draws. So 10 over 70, the variability is something along the lines of like 12%, whereas we saw with comprehensive ranking system, it's more like 20 to 25%. Okay. And they don't really care as much if you speak French. Okay. And you'll see what does it mean, 2 official languages? Do they have to be at the same level, right? What does that count for? You see that in the OINP portal. Regionalization, this is important too. They care where your job is. They care where your job is, and they care where you went to school, okay? And for the purposes of the OINP, they consider the city of Toronto. They consider the Greater Toronto Area, the 4 regions, Halton, York, Peel, and Durham, okay, as the GTA. So outside the GTA would be Hamilton, okay, would be Niagara, would be London. Then you've got North and Ottawa, and then you've got Northern Ontario, which would be those specific regions that they Grand Sudbury, Temiskaming, Cochrane. So basically, if you're nominated, they tell you you'll receive a nomination approval letter, a work permit support letter, if applicable, and a nomination certificate, okay? So I'll talk a little bit later about how to do the work permit application. That's a video I've been meaning to put out and show people specifically how to do the work permit application. Okay, because it's not a bridging open work permit if there are employment restrictions on your nomination. So then they talk about what you have to submit to IRCC. You do it through the PR portal. Okay, the permanent residence portal. And these are the eligible Ontario institutions, okay? They're all pretty decent institutions. The universities that offer a graduate at least 1 year in duration, they have them here. A graduate certificate, Indigenous institutes, eligible Canadian institutions, of course. Yeah, here are the Canadian institutions, all right? And you saw that there was that a lengthier and higher level of education required if you're coming from outside Ontario or if you studied outside Ontario. So just be very cautious. Make sure that you would in fact qualify. Okay, and that's pretty much it. I've gone through the scoring factors. Okay, now what are the eligibility requirements? You need to have a job offer from your employer, but it's not a job offer the way a job offer is an express entry, okay? So it is not an LMIA-based job offer. It doesn't need to be, and it doesn't need to be an LMIA-exempt job offer like a closed work permit where you've been working, accumulated more than a year of experience for the employer. It's not the same definition as what they call an express entry, okay? So the job offer just means that it's signed between you and your employer. They have the specific requirements for it in the employer guide, what it needs to contain. Essentially just a handwritten job offer, or signed, I should say. And the employer has to also fill out an employer form. And I'm going to show you guys the employer form so you can see what it looks like, because it's a smart form. And until you start answering it, it doesn't show you the rest of the fields that the employer has to produce. So I'd like to show you that it actually isn't a ton of work for the employer. Any genuine employer should be able to do this form in 15 or 20 minutes. But it is a required document that you have to submit. And it's basically got information that is just qualifying the employer for being able to give you that job offer. So the job offer requirements, it has to be, yes, full-time, okay, and permanent. It has to be an eligible occupation, okay? So it's known as an indeterminate permanent job offer. It has to be in a skilled occupation, which is obviously tier 1, 0, 1, 2, or 3. It has to meet exceed the low wage level, okay, for your occupation and in the region you're at, okay? So that's, how are you going to qualify yourself for that? Well, let's say you're getting paid $28 an hour and you are a chemical engineer in London, Ontario. Let's figure that out. Let's go to, you can click the wage report or go to Job Bank Wages. And let's find chemical engineer 21320, okay? And I said you're working in London, right? Oh, they have it listed here. So this is the low, the median, and the high. If your employer was going to get you, and you watch this on my YouTube video for LMIAs, if your employer wants to get you an LMIA approved, they're gonna have to offer you a job that's at least the median, okay? So they're gonna have to pay you $42 an hour as a chemical engineer in London, Ontario, if they want to get an LMIA approved. But like I said, you have to meet the low. You have to be greater than the low starting wage in OINP. So they could give you a job offer as low as $20.01 per hour, okay? Because that is the low wage for chemical engineers in London. And if you don't have, let's say you were working as a chemical engineer in Muskoka and it's not applicable or not available, you have to go use the Ontario wage, which is, you'd have to be paid more than $20 per hour, okay? So that's what will make the job offer valid, and that's how you can pre-qualify yourself. So this guy, like I said, chemical engineer in London, let's say getting paid $28 per hour, they would meet that requirement, okay, for the low wage level. Now, the wage requirement When it doesn't apply is if there's a collective agreement, okay, which means that it's a unionized company, and it's known as a collective bargaining agreement, and in that collective bargaining agreement, they're going to have things like hourly wages based upon seniority. There's a lot of unionized, like healthcare positions, teachers, right? So the wage requirements don't apply if there's a collective bargaining agreement, but you do need to include that collective agreement, at least the wages part, for your OINP submission, okay? Now, they tell you how you can calculate your annual salary. Positions urgently necessary to employer's business. What they're trying to avoid here is, people doing job offers from overseas in the OINP. They do want people, because you saw in the scoring factors, they rank it higher if you have a work permit, if you have tenure with the employer, but still it needs to be urgently necessary to support the employer's business. And what does that mean? Well, that means that they need you to maintain or grow the ongoing business activity. I would argue that unless your employer is winding up operations or winding down operations and laying people off, then your position is urgently necessary. Work based in Ontario, of course, yes, it's got to be where you report or where your manager reports to. It must occur primarily in Ontario, and you're not allowed to have equity in the company because, they don't want business owners doing any kind of monkey business to offer their buddies and business partners PRs. So they do allow you to have up to 10%. That would only count if, like, stock options, for example, right, in a company, if you get stock options as part of the employment agreement remuneration package. And the applicant requirements. So how does it work? I'm going to show you as well, submitting an expression of interest, how that entire process goes, okay? And you must prove you have one of the following eligible credentials. Now, of course, because you've obtained this in Canada, you're not going to need to get a WES or an ECA, an Education Credential Assessment, right? You're just going to need to have your diploma or your degree and your transcripts, all right? And there are requirements that it has to be full-time study, and more than half the requirements to obtain the credential were living and studying in Canada, okay? And valid license or other authorization. So if you were working as a chemical engineer and you call yourself a chemical engineer and you're signing off on plant design, absolutely you're going to need to show that you've got a license from the Professional Engineers of Ontario. But maybe you're a chemical engineer in training, okay? Maybe you have a probationary license or you're earning that experience to then ultimately become a professional engineer. You should show your preliminary registration. This also applies to nurses, obviously, right? If you're a nurse or a healthcare professional, the college will be regulating you and you need to show that you're authorized to work in that NOC code. Intention to live in Ontario. Well, this is part of when you're doing the EOI, but when you're submitting your nomination application, they're going to ask for some proof. They're going to say, how do we know that you want to live in Ontario? You got intention. If your work history is in Ontario, you're getting job offers, you could show that you've been interviewing for jobs, you've studied in Ontario, all those things, leasing, owning property, totally makes sense. Legal status in Canada, you need to have valid legal status. So visitor record is okay. So if you're coming close to losing your work permit and you still would be competitive without those extra 10 points and just be on a visitor record, you could apply for this and then apply for a work permit with your letter of support once you get nominated and stay in Canada as a visitor and then get back on to a work permit, okay? I'm going to do a video later on how to do PNP specific work permits or work permits for like the RNIP, which aren't bridging open work permits, okay? So I'm going to do that and I'll show you guys that later as well on another video. So they talk about the legal status in Canada requirement, but visitor record, study permit, or work permit at the time you apply, okay? And you should maintain that status until the time of nomination. This is where I say if you're on maintained status as a worker, but it was a baseless extension or a fake extension, you're probably going to get that refusal before you get your nomination, potentially. So just be cautious of that. Now, if you're getting nominated, it all comes down. It's crazy with timing right now because people are, at risk of going out of status, and they're doing, baseless extensions to try and buy 3 more months. If they have a nomination in already, but they're waiting for the decision on it, well, that's going to take 3 to 5 months typically. And there's going to be a decision on a work permit that you've submitted before then, likely, because the processing time right now is around 98 days. It's about 3 months. So they talk about the application period, and this is very, very important, okay? So you must submit your EOI, receive your invitation, and then apply for nomination less than 2 years after you've completed your study, okay? So completing the requirements necessary to obtain your degree. I like that. I like how they're specifying that. Like once you've basically completed the requirements. So the end date or official letter that you've completed your studies and when you did that. So keep that in mind. You can only use this pathway if you've graduated less than 2 years ago. Okay. Now, employer requirements. What are the employer requirements? They're basically, the general requirements are they've been in business for 3 years. They have a business premise in Ontario, and they have no outstanding orders against the Ontario Employment Standards or Occupational Health and Safety Act. So they're a good, genuine employer that isn't in trouble for anything. Revenue requirements. This is important. Your employer doesn't have to show the tax documents. Your employer only has to declare it on the employer form. They only have to say whether they're making over $1 million, over 2 million, or under 1 million, and between 500 and 1 million. So that they're not submitting those documents. They can be requested those documents, however, which I don't necessarily love, because again, when you create all this friction for employers, you make it harder for bona fide foreign nationals to become permanent residents, because you're putting another roadblock in for them. You're putting more power in the hands of the employers. So again, if provincial immigration ministers are watching this video and listening to it, tighten the PNPs to be more focused on the applicant's history in Canada and the applicant's potential and the applicant's own factors that they can control, and rely less on the employer. Okay? So they need to make a minimum of $1 million revenue in the last tax year, okay, in the most recent tax year, if it's in Toronto or the Greater Toronto Area, which includes those 4 regions, as I mentioned. The requirements get cut in half, okay, if it is outside the Greater Toronto Area. So if they're in Hamilton, or if they're in Kingston, London, Kitchener, Waterloo. Meaning of report to work. What they're saying is, in cases where the applicant will work at more than one location, where they report to work, where the manager or supervisor works, or location of the administrative office where the applicant will receive work assignments. So they're trying to make sure that not the company has, because they talk about the amount of employees, it would be like if you go to an office and there's 20 employees, great. That's where you're reporting to work. But if you're at a satellite office where there's only 3 people that work out of there, and the satellite office is in Toronto, that would be some problems here, because the full-time employee requirements are to have at least 5 full-time employees who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents who work at the location where you will work or will report to work if you work or report to work at locations in the GTA. Okay? But only 3 at that particular work location, okay, if it's outside the GTA. That can get a little bit confusing, and they have to be Canadian citizens or permanent residents. So yeah, a gas station in London that has 4 Canadians or permanent residents, that would be fine. A convenience store that only has 2 in London, that would not be okay. All right? And they talk about what the meaning of a full-time employee is. That's a minimum of 30 hours per week. And they do have in the details somewhere that you can add up part-time employees. So you've got 2 part-time employees that are working 15 hours each a week. That's a total of 1 full-time 30-hour per week employee. Okay? And then they have the employer form. And now we're back down to scoring factors, okay? So I would like to show you the employer form, that I've graciously filled out with basically just fake data so that you know what to expect from it. So here's the employer form, and we can review the summary pages. This is pretty short. It's actually mostly a disclaimer at the end. But this is what your employer is going to have to fill out. And the questions are obviously general business information, mailing address, business phone number. They want to know the date of incorporation, the registration number, like the corporate access number, the Canada Revenue Agency business number. They want to know the business legal structure in Ontario. They want to know if it's been amalgamated in the last 3 years, because you know that the business has to be in operation for 3 years. So if there's been an amalgamation, like the joining of two companies, they want to know that one has actually been in business for more than 3 years and it's continuing on those operations. Okay, they're doing an operational assessment, and they're asking for gross revenue. Like I said, your employer just needs to declare this and declare it truthfully, but they don't need to actually show any supporting documents at this point. Okay, they have to put their start date of the fiscal year and end date of the most recent fiscal year. So when they last reported to the CRA what their earnings were, and then they indicate that here, and companies can set whatever fiscal date they want. They could, their year end can be April, it can be September. Business profile information. So they do ask if it falls within the ICT or advanced manufacturing sector. I don't really know, and I can't see from the eligibility requirements why they're asking for this. I would imagine it's because back in the day they had the OINP entrepreneur stream, and in there they would cut in half the investment requirements if the business was in ICT or advanced manufacturing. Okay, but I don't know if that necessarily applies to international student. They want to know the business's economic sector, which it's a NAICS code. They're using a 2-digit code, but the NAICS actually goes to 5 digits, just like NOC. But they don't care for so much granularity. Here, your employer would write a 1 to 2 sentence description of what you do. For example, a restaurant would be: dining establishments serve customers food and drink for dine-in and takeout services for a fee. Basically, the most generic description of what the business actually does. They want to know the number of business locations. Of course, that means kind of like branches or offices, or let's say different locations. They want to know the total amount of people working, Canadians or permanent residents, at all the locations. For large companies, I can imagine this might be a bit of a headache. They might have the exact number, they might not. But they know that foreign worker social insurance numbers start with 9. So anybody who has a social insurance number that doesn't start with 9 is not a foreign worker. They're either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. So they want to know where you'll be working. They want to know if it's in the GTA or not, and we know exactly why, because the requirements double, essentially, for revenue requirements, and the full-time employees at that location need to be 5 as opposed to just 3. And at that business location, okay, that specific location, and that's where they're testing. If they see that it's outside the GTA, this can be 3. If it's inside the GTA, it has to be at least 5. Business signing officer, this is somebody who can bind the business, okay? It may be different than the employer contact, right? Who will be like the business signing officer might be the HR director, and the employer contact might be the human resource manager, okay? It may be the same person if it's a smaller company. Position information, they do want to know in the last 12 months, which that's considered a calendar year for them, if your business supported an application to the OINP, and then you should indicate how many applications your business supported. Why it's not an integer is beyond me. And were some of these applications where you'll report to work and were for the same position as the current applicant? I think here they're just trying to determine if you're running an immigration farm through your company. Job offer information, they're putting it here. Okay, that would be for you, the applicant. This is your NOC code. Let's go back to the chemical engineer in London. Hourly wage and hours of work per week. Okay, they do say 52. They have the clarification on the actual form that's not printed. I did print this one, so If it's not printed and it's still an active form where you can change it, they give you, what does it mean? They say don't deduct vacation. Okay. So 52 would be like, yeah, they're working for the full year. Okay. Non-seasonal. And yes, if you have a collective agreement with wages, a union, you have to provide that with the applicant for the applicant to submit with their OINP nomination. Is it full-time? And are you currently working in the business? If you put no, it'll say please specify and talk about how you could get a promotion, but that's pretty straightforward. They'd indicate your hourly wage and list the main duties here. Of course, you're going to want to make sure that those main duties match up with your NOC code, okay, and are going to match up with what you're actually doing in the company. Again, why it does make sense to pay for a review from a consultant, right? Someone who sees a lot of NOC codes, pay for a review or get full representation. Somebody who can say, yeah, there's no mistakes here. That would pass as a chemical engineer. And they want to explain why the position's necessary, okay? So I guess they're looking for here that the business isn't winding up or winding down or shutting down or laying people off. But in my opinion, anybody who's working for a company and is working permanently full-time, they are essential and they are needed and necessary to that business and to the economic activity of that business. They ask, do you have any equity in the business? Of course, if you click yes here, then we'll break you down how much. Is it part of remuneration and package? Okay, because you can if it's like a stock option. And have you applied for a labor market impact assessment? The reason they ask for this is because depending on your status, you may have to fill out the employer would have to fill out another section of the form. So if you are currently authorized to work in Ontario, like you're on a PGWP, you're on an open work permit, or you're applying as an international student, so you're on a valid study permit, you can proceed to Section E. Because you have the ability to work in Ontario and you have the ability to work essentially like an open work permit, right? Even if you were on a closed work permit, that is still considered, you're still considered an authorized, like a closed work permit in Ontario, you're still authorized to work in Ontario, you would proceed to Section E, okay? But if you are an individual in another Canadian province working on a valid temporary work permit, proceed to Section D. So if somebody's living in Alberta and they're on a closed work permit with Alberta, they have to go to Section D. For an individual who lives abroad or is visiting, so they're on visitor status, they'd have to proceed to Section D. Now with Section D, what they talk about is they bring in recruitment requirements. So they have to state how long they've posted the ad. They need to include copies of the advertising, and they have to provide that with you. So for a lot of people who are currently working for the employer, it's very painless for the employer. But if you're trying to get on a work permit with this employer, right, or start being able to work for this employer or move from another province to work for this employer, they're going to have to show recruitment unless they have an LMIA. Okay, because if they have the LMIA and you're on a closed work permit with them, that's not a problem. You don't need to show recruitment requirements. Let's say you're on an LMIA exempt work permit with that employer. They wouldn't have to show recruitment requirements because you're authorized to work in Ontario, especially with that closed work permit. Okay, so that's the employer form. Then they have to print it, hand sign it, and give it to you. Okay, that is the employer form. And now let's dig into I'm going to post these links as well. So there's the employer checklist. This here is the employer guide. So they talk about trying to guide employers so they can understand the requirements. They do talk about it here: active business, revenue requirement, meaning of report to work, full-time employee. These are across all of these employer job offer stream. These requirements are the same. Okay. They talk about the reasonable domestic recruitment efforts if you're not on a valid work permit to work in Ontario, or if you don't have a valid labor market impact assessment for the position. They talk about what the advertising or recruitment efforts are, and I'm not going to go into that detail because I think for a lot of people who are currently working in Ontario, this is going to be a golden ticket for them. Job offer requirements, full-time and permanent position, and they talk about eligible occupation. Well, this is under the, they're saying here, Under the foreign worker, international student, the job offered, any must be skilled, but they also have the in-demand skills stream. So this is kind of a generic employer guide. Now, they talk about what are the supporting documents. They talk about how to fill out this form that I just showed you guys, essentially. Let's look at the employer checklist. So employer form and job offer signed by you and the applicant. They talk about what the job offer must include. It must be dated. It must be less than 6 months old. Business letterhead. Okay. It has to have the NOC code, job title. Now, the recruitment efforts may be required, or collective agreement may be required, or copy of the LMIA if they don't want to substantiate that they've been doing recruitment. They haven't had to do recruitment efforts, right? And for transport truck driver positions, they need a valid CDOR certificate. Additional documents, they may ask for these. So this is kind of what frustrates me too. If employers see this, they think, oh, wow, I might have to show them my Canada Revenue Agency schedules or financial statements signed by a CPA, prove if it was amalgamated, you purchased it, financial statements, all these things that they may be requested. Now, in my experience, I do not believe most genuine employers that maintain a strong public presence will and haven't used the OINP extensively or aren't running any immigration linked fraud schemes through it will be requested for these documents. I mean, they may, and your employer should have these anyways, to show they have a business premise if they're not certain that they have a place of business in Ontario, right? And this is the employer checklist. They also have the applicant checklist. I'm going to rip through this one, but this is what you would complete, not when you do your EOI, but when you do your nomination application. You're going to have your photograph, passport, and this is why I say it's a lot like a PR application. So you'd likely want to have a consultant potentially review your EOI, but most definitely review your nomination submission, okay, to make sure you've got all the documents, that nothing's expired, the job offer, and all these things. Education, right? They're going to say what you need. And resume, they want a resume. Okay, that's interesting. That's not a required document in Express Entry. And this is the full applicant checklist, which you can expect. Now, finally, before I wrap this up, I'm going to go into just showing you guys. I was looking at the immigration levels plan. You can see, yeah, half are PNPs. So people need to start looking at the PNPs. It's not all about Express Entry, especially now. It's just so much more challenging. So if you have those factors that make you more qualified for OINP, like you're getting paid well, you're in a regional area, you studied in a regional area, you have a supportive employer, but they're not willing to do an LMIA, and you've got 6 to 9 months left on your work permit, go through OINP. So, and your score is competitive. And you can see with the OINP, I want to just show you guys what the draws have been. We see that 5,000 were invited in 2024 to date. And they break down the time. So we look at international student stream. So a couple weeks back, they had a general draw, which means they took everyone that was 72 and above on the skill selection grid. You're going to see that you may have factors that you might be competitive. You might be above 72 if you're in targeted draws for skilled trades. The score range is lower. They had a general draw about a month back, and it was 78. So I would, if you are getting in that 60 or 70 range, you may as well submit a profile, right? They also have the foreign worker stream. I can break that down on another day, but for a lot of people who have studied here and are on a PGWP, the international student will be more competitive. Let's see, in August, it was 61, but it was targeted only for skilled trades, tech and health. They did a general draw that went to 82 and above, okay? So 82 is a pretty competitive score. Let's see what our engineer would get. I type in OINP This one right here, Ontario Immigration. So here we go. I'm going to sign in, and they've got their declaration here, 1 registration per stream. Well, there's 3 streams technically, and the one is completely out of operation right now. Let's do submit an application for a new client. We've got business, entrepreneur. See, it's out of, you could put in a human capital one, okay, under human capital priority stream if you're working in that type of occupation. And let's do international student, okay? And let's go through. It's actually quite simple. This is my representative's declaration. Perfect. Okay, let's check it out. Let's see how easy it is. You've got your name. I put my name and my date of birth. Let's just do this. Telephone. It's actually very simple. Email address, anything@anything.co. And it always stalls here. I don't know why. I've gone through this. I've done a few takes on this video. But I do think this is a fantastic program for a lot of people. Country of residence, Canada, passport number. You put it in your passport number. That's your personal profile. You're gonna have all that information right now. Now, occupation for your job offer. We said this guy was a chemical engineer and he was getting $28 per hour. They're going to use that data to calculate those points because he's making $25 to $30 per hour. So he's going to get a certain amount of points. Been working for the employer 6 to 12 months. Highest pre-tax income, say made $65,000 in 3 years ago in Canada. Let's say he was doing a lot of trading or something when he was a student. Do you have a legal immigration status in Canada? Yes, currently as a worker. What type of work permit? Let's say post-graduation, and let's say the start date here. And you notice here they do allow implied or maintained. And, well, let's do 2023 to... All right. Highest level of education, let's say did do a bachelor degree from overseas, but did, chemical engineering technology in Canada. So that would be engineering technology, and graduated. See, I'm just making things up at this point. So 2022, and the name of institution, these are the ones that are allowed. I don't even know if they have it, but say he did it at McMaster, and it was a graduate college degree or diploma. Field of study, it was engineering technology. Years of study, it was a 2-year program. Now, no other education credential. Yes, this person has CELPIP because it's just an easier exam. Date of test. Well, they've got to be valid test results. So let's put 25, 10, and 2023. And the date of test result, that can be the same, just for illustrative purposes. Okay. Now, select the location. I mentioned he's in London, Ontario. It is... There you go. And which credential will you be using? It was granted by Ontario that you physically attended. We are going to... He studied... which school? I used McMaster. So that was in Hamilton. Okay? McMaster's in Hamilton. Now... This is Economic Mobility Pathways Project. Would not be for that. Look, 96. Wow. So then you get your score. You click next and put your full legal name, sign, and send. But you probably want to have a consultant just confirm your scoring first. Make sure you're okay to submit so that you don't do anything wrong and then have to deny your invitation. So tier category, you see you get 1 because it's professional occupation, it's applied sciences. You get a bit of points for the hourly wage, tenure, previous earnings. So this is awesome. And even though the highest level, bachelor degree or equivalent, field of study, engineering technology is a good one. A lot of people would qualify in this, but they've got to be, you see the factors. It matters where you study. It matters where your job is. It matters what you're paid and what you're working in. So I hope this was very informative. I know it was a very long video. There's so much to go through, but that's the EOI. And then when I have a nomination, I mean, I would love to go through what it looks like when you're submitting a nomination, right? I'd love to show you. The portal looks very similar, kind of like this late 90s, early 2000s look. And they basically ask for everything in that International Student Stream applicant checklist. So you can be prepared to have a section where they're asking for status documents, employer documents, job offer letter, current employment, license or authorization, collective agreement, education documents. Of course, if those are necessary, the collective and license or authorization. And your job offer letter and work, all this stuff. So this checklist is great. You can prepare for it without even having access to the nomination portal yet. So my next video is probably going to be along the lines of how to extend your status if you are a provincial nominee and you cannot apply for a bridging open work permit because there's employment restrictions on your nomination. So thank you again for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. It helps me to put out more of this content. I like to educate people on the immigration process. And I really do see this as a fantastic opportunity for a lot of people who are currently working right now. They have an employer that isn't too resistant to just filling out an employer form. And if they're being paid a good wage and they have good regional factors, there's actually, when you look through all those factors, you'll notice one thing's glaring compared to express entry, and that is there's no age requirement. There's no they're not looking at federal skilled work experience from overseas, right? They're basing it on what you've done in Canada and what you're earning now. And that's why I like this kind of scoring actually better than the CRS and express entry. But I do wish that there wasn't so much friction or potential audit or any for the employer, right? Because then that takes power away from the hands of the applicant. So yeah, once again, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this video if you know somebody who may qualify for the International Student Stream, if they have those kind of competitive factors, engineering technology or STEM fields they studied, where they're working, and it's been less than 2 years since they completed their credential. So thanks again and take care.